Imagine, if you will, that you are watching your hero up on the screen. There he is, larger than life, dominating every second of the runtime with his presence. You are having the absolute time of your life watching him, but wait.
Okay, little trip. That was great, Billy.
That is not him. In fact, in the entirety of the movie, which you probably only got for him, he is only in about 10% of it. But how can that be?
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee. I was born in San Francisco in 1940. I'm 24 right now.
Nowadays, it is hard to think of an actor whose image is as iconic as Bruce Lee. Growing up, not many of my peers were as into martial art movies as me, and yet every single one of them knows who he was. Everything about the man has become iconic, from his physicality to his philosophy.
Be water, my friend.
From his epic battles to his epic battle cries. Everything about him has made him as iconic of a figure as Marilyn Monroe or James Dean before him. Even if you haven't seen a single one of Lee's movies, you know exactly who he is. However, he has something else in common with those actors previously mentioned. He was taken away far too soon. It might shock some people to know that Bruce Lee only made 4 films before he tragically passed away at 32. Well, 4.5, but we'll get to that soon. For Bruce, trying to break into Hollywood as an Asian American actor in the 1960s was an impossible task. There were very few depictions of Asian people at the time, and the ones that were in movies were troubling to say the least. This was what made it so hard for Bruce Lee to break in. Even if a role was literally made for him, it wasn't guaranteed that he would get the part. And the parts they offered him were not ones he could ever take in good conscience.
It was very challenging because there were not Chinese leading men in Hollywood, and many of the roles were very stereotyped, and he refused to take roles that he felt were not doing justice to his culture. And it was very hard for him to break in.
So rather than wait for Hollywood to give him an opportunity, he went out and made his own. Bruce Lee went to Hong Kong and found immediate success there. He took the already existing Chinese opera style of filmmaking and changed it to match his unique style. Lee directed his third film, Way of the Dragon, and it proved to be his way into global stardom.
So I got up early the next morning, they had a car pick me up, took me to the airport. I checked in, I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, huge crowd. I mean, like Elvis was coming. And I look up and it's Bruce. I mean, he was just like the Pied Piper. I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of people around him.
However, fame wasn't the main thing Bruce Lee was after. Those who are familiar with his high-flying kicks also know that his teachings hit just as hard. He didn't just want to take his martial arts and use it to entertain people, he wanted to educate them on the cultural importance of Kung Fu. So he came up with an idea, a way to educate the world on the importance of adaptability and self-expression. He came up with a movie that would serve as a grand thesis on his ideals. He came up with A Game of Death. A Game of Death became a passion project for Bruce Lee, and he wrote a 12-page loose script documenting the story and the fights. If that doesn't seem like enough material to make a movie out of, you'd be right. The reason for this is that the rest of the script was all in Bruce Lee's head, since he served as the writer, director, fight choreographer, and star of the movie. He was able to shoot some footage for the movie before a different opportunity made him put it on hold. After only shooting the climax of the film, Lee went deep into production on Enter the Dragon. Lee desperately wanted to see it made, as it would be a joint production between China and the States, featuring some of the top talent of both. The film is widely viewed as his best work. However, he never got to see it for himself. Bruce Lee passed away due to an allergic reaction to a painkiller just 2 weeks before Enter the Dragon came out. After the tragic passing of Lee, the world was reeling from the loss. However, one group that seemed to take his loss the hardest was the production company Golden Harvest. Golden Harvest was a large production company operating out of China, and they were the ones that produced Bruce Lee's films. With their shining star missing, the company's future started to look rather dim. Thankfully, they were resourceful enough to know how to profit from the tragedy. They began re-releasing all of Bruce Lee's pre-existing movies in theatres. This is understandable until you realise that when they did re-release them, they changed the titles of all the movies to confuse audiences into thinking they were new movies. One glaring example was how they changed Way of the Dragon into The Return of the Dragon, just so people thought it was a sequel he made before his death. They got away with it because the demand for Bruce Lee content was at an all-time high. However, once they ran out of his movies, they had to go back to the drawing board to see what else they could do.
You know what? Here's a world-class athlete. To finish the film, we need to hire world-class talent.
They decided to take the existing footage that Lee shot and build a wholly new film around it. Rather than incorporate Bruce Lee's story plans, they crafted a new one to best capitalize on the real-life events going on. Before even finishing the pre-production, the company began to spread the word that they were in possession of the last film Bruce Lee ever made. The only issue is that Lee had only shot about 30 minutes of usable footage before his death. So now the question is, how do we fill the rest of the movie? The casting pool was wide and extensive to find someone to fill the part. A sad piece of irony of this all being that for Bruce Lee's entire career, there was no demand for Asian actors. Now all of a sudden, they were the most in-demand group, provided they had a passing resemblance to Lee. It is actually kind of shocking that with the sheer volume of people who sent in auditions, the two stand-ins that made the cut looked nothing like him.
We're ready for you, Billy.
Okay.
The lengths they went to hide this fact is actually what makes Game of Death such a baffling film. The bargain bin Bruce has to basically have his back turned to the camera in every shot. When he does face the camera, they give him either a large pair of sunglasses to cover his face or drench him in shadow for nearly the entire shot. As for the scenes where close-ups were required,
Well, sitting right there by the telephone. Just waiting for you to call.
we now live in a world where the debate over resurrecting dead actors using deepfakes is a hot-button issue. However, for as bad as that can look, at least it still isn't that. To achieve this practical effects wizardry, the filmmakers taped a cardboard cutout of Bruce Lee's face to the mirror and had the actor stand behind it. The results clearly speak for themselves. They went to extreme lengths to convince the audience that the stand-ins were the definitive article, but in every scene they remind you it is not. This is most transparent during the movie's multiple fight scenes. Almost all the fight scenes in this movie were shot in a wide angle. This is a good choice if you want the extra coverage, but there is only one problem with it. It isn't how Bruce Lee would do it. If you look at Bruce Lee's filmmaking, part of why it was so revolutionary for the States was that it was all done for real. He personally curated stunt teams of professionals he trusted and then just let them fight, using clear, concise close-ups to sell the emotion or intensity of the scene. So, because they didn't have the real Bruce to cut to when it came time for those close-ups, they either avoided it altogether or used close-up shots of Bruce that they had in the vault from different movies. However, this proved to be even worse as they didn't bother to make the backgrounds match, so it really takes you out of it.
You lose, Carl Miller.
This whole movie actually suffers for that reason. The integration of the real Bruce Lee footage into it doesn't make it better. All that does is just remind you how much better the movie could have been, and nowhere is that more apparent than at the end of the movie. Bruce Lee had shot about 30 minutes of footage for the film's climax. The story for his version of Game of Death was to follow a martial arts champion that needs to put aside his peaceful nature when his sister and baby brother are kidnapped. The film would be loosely based around the labors of Hercules, where a person is pushed to their absolute limit and then some. In order to do that, he needed strong opponents to push him to those limits. It is only through the character's adaptability can he overcome the odds. The climax shows this in full effect. The 10 minutes of it that did make it into Game of Death were already the best part of the movie. However, things have gotten even better decades later. Some special editions released in 2020 and in 2023 have been able to recover the entirety of Bruce Lee's completed footage that would have otherwise been lost to time. And it is so unmistakably him in it.
How do you like that?
Each one of these fight scenes tells a story by themselves. There are 3 completed fights, but he had planned for there to be 5 of them before he passed away. In the original footage, there are other people going against the same opponents in the original cut, which ups the dramatic tension and makes the combatants look that much more menacing. All the opponents do a fantastic job of representing a unique method of martial arts, but there is one in particular that steals the show. The way the film's ending is set up was done to where you could feel the exhaustion coming from Lee's character after each battle. The ending takes place over the course of a large tower set piece, and on the top of the tower is Lee's largest opponent ever put to a screen. Literally. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was actually a student of Bruce Lee's, and so he was a natural choice to be the culmination of his work. Each one of the fighters represent the different methods of kung fu that exist, but Kareem's character, named Hakim, represented the unknown. This was true to his vision, as he wanted to show that if you were stuck in your own ways and not able to adapt, then you will never be prepared to change to match the situation. All the different layers just so distinctly fit together, yet the movie the public got had no trace of it. The plot to their game of death only exists to further capitalize on Bruce Lee's death. The main character of the movie is a martial arts movie star, very creatively, named Billy Lowe. When Bruce Lee died in 1973, there were a lot of conspiracies around it involving where people tried to say the Chinese mob were after him, or that he had actually died as a result of a stunt gone wrong. So what does this movie do? They have his character get killed by the mob after they put a real bullet into a prop gun. Not only has this become even more messed up with the tragic passing of Bruce Lee's son Brandon decades later, they were doing the same thing back then. They wanted you to wonder and come up with theories and tie it to real life, so you would continue to see this movie. Then, in a further classy move, they have his character fake his death. How did they show this, you may ask? By using real-life footage from Bruce Lee's funeral that was gathered against his family's wishes. The entire movie feels so disjointed from the climax that Bruce Lee had shot. Part of the reason for this is that none of the people who were signed on to make Bruce's movie wanted to come back. They all felt that Golden Harvest was deliberately taking advantage of Lee's legacy, because they were. To go around this, they hired lookalikes to show earlier in the movie and set them up. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and all the actors were offered large amounts to reprise their roles in other scenes, but all refused for the same reason.
But my hands are registered as lethal weapons. That means we get into a fight, I accidentally kill you, I go to jail.
Anybody accidentally kills anybody in a fight, they go to jail. It's called manslaughter.
In recent years, there has been an idea built up that Bruce Lee was cocky or arrogant, but the people who have actually worked with him couldn't disagree more. They all say that he was a passionate person that knew what he wanted. Some of Lee's other famous students and friends, such as James Garner, Steve McQueen, and even Muhammad Ali, were all offered roles as well, but refused because they didn't want to touch something that would damage the legacy of a man they admired. Because Bruce Lee died before he could make it his way, his last film turned into a cash grab that goes against what he wanted. They weren't the only ones who were trying to take advantage of his legacy after his death, but no one can take away the good he did before he died. All the people that now have the opportunity to create, all of these people that are now able to inspire others, all owe Bruce Lee for proving that they deserved a chance all those years ago.